All right, welcome to Grail Country. We're continuing with our meditations on the Divine Comedy series. This time we are approaching Canto 9 of the Inferno. Had a little bit of a delay getting started this morning, but we're here and we're glad that you can join us. And Sherry has volunteered to be our reader today. Let me go ahead and get the text up for the audience. Let me share my screen. Whoops. It would help if I actually got it up instead. Oh, there we go. All right. All right.
Okay. Oh, you're not there yet.
I got to pick the right one. Uh, there we go. All right. There we are. Okay. I'm ready when
All
you
right.
are, Sherry.
Okay. Confessions. I'm mostly the reason why we're so late. So, and I just woke up. So have mercy on me as I read. First thing in the morning. Okay. My face had paled to a mask of cowardice when I saw my guide turn back. The sight of it the sooner brought the color back to his. He stood apart like one who strains to hear what he cannot see, for the eye could not reach far across the vapors of that midnight air. Yet surely we were meant to pass these tombs, he said aloud. If not, so much was promised. Oh, how time hangs and drags till our aid comes. I saw too well how the words with which he ended covered his start, and even perhaps I drew a worse conclusion from that than he intended. Tell me, master, does anyone ever come from the first ledge whose only punishment is hope cut off into this dreary bottom? I put this question to him, still in fear of what his broken speech might mean, and he, rarely do any of us enter. Once before, it is true, I crossed through hell, conjured by cruel Erictho, who recalled the spirits to their bodies. Her dark spell forced me, newly stripped of my mortal part, to enter through this gate and summon out a spirit from Judaica. Take heart. That is the last depth and the darkest lair and the farthest from heaven, which encircles all. And at that time, I came back even from there. The marsh from which the stinking gases bubble lies all about this capital of sorrow, whose gates we may not pass now without trouble. All this and more he expounded, but the rest was lost on me, for suddenly my attention was drawn to the turret with the fiery crest, where all at once three hellish and inhuman furies sprang to view, blood-stained and wild. Their limbs and gestures hinted they were women. Belts of greenest hydras wound and wound about their waists, and snakes and horned serpents grew from their heads like matted hair and bound their horrid brows. My master, who well knew the handmaids of the Queen of Woe, cried, "Look, the terrible Erinyes of Hecate's crew. That is Megaera to the left of the tower. Alecto is the one who raves on the right. Tisiphone stands between." And he said no more. With their palms they beat their brows, with their nails they clawed their bleeding breasts, and such mad wails broke from them that I drew close to the poet, overawed. And all together screamed, looking down at me, "Call Medusa that we may change him to stone. Too lightly we let Theseus go free. Turn your back and keep your eyes shut tight, for should the Gorgon come and you look at her, never again would you return to the light." This was my guide's command, and he turned me about himself and would not trust my hands alone, but with his placed on mine, held my eyes shut. Men of sound intellect and probity weigh with good understanding what lies hidden behind the veil of my strange allegory. Suddenly there broke on the dirty swell of the dark marsh a squall of terrible sound that sent a tremor through both shores of hell. A sound as if two continents of air, one frigid and one scorching, clashed head on in a war of winds that stripped the forests bare, ripped off whole boughs, and blew them helter-skelter along the range of dust it raised before it, making the beasts and shepherds run for shelter. The master freed my eyes. Now turn, he said, and fix your nerve of vision on the foam, there where the smoke is thickest and most acrid. As frogs before the snake that hunts them down turn up their pond in flight until the last squats on the bottom as if turned to stone, so I saw more than 1,000 ruined souls scatter away from one who crossed dry-shod the Stygian marsh into hell's burning bowels. With his left hand he fanned away the dreary vapors of that stink as he approached, and only of that annoyance did he seem weary. Clearly he was a messenger from God's throne, and I turned to my guide, but he made me a sign that I should keep my silence and bow down. Ah, what scorn breathed from that angel presence! He reached the gate of Dis, and with a wand he waved it open, for there was no resistance. Outcasts of heaven, you twice loathsome crew, he cried upon that terrible sill of hell, how does this insolence still live in you? Why do you set yourselves against that throne, whose will none can deny, and which times past has added to your pain for each rebellion? Why do you butt against fate's ordinance? Your Cerberus, if you recall, still wears his throat and chin peeled for such arrogance. Then he turned back through the same filthy tide by which he had come. He did not speak to us, but went his way like one preoccupied by other presences than those before him. And we moved toward the city, fearing nothing after his holy words. Straight through the dim and open gate we entered unopposed, and I, eager to learn what new estate of hell those burning fortress walls enclosed, began to look about the very moment we were inside. And I saw on every hand a countryside of sorrow and new torment. As at Arles, where the Rhone sinks into stagnant marshes, as at Pola by the Quarnarno Gulf, whose waters close Italy and wash her farthest reaches. The uneven tombs cover the even plain. Such fields I saw here spread in all directions, except that here the tombs were chests of pain. For in a ring around each tomb, great fires raised every wall to a red heat. No smith works hotter iron in his forge. The biers stood with their lids upraised, and from their pits an anguished moaning rose on the dead air from the desolation of tormented spirits. And I, Master, what shades are these who lie buried in these chests and fill the air with such a painful and unending cry? These are the arch heretics of all cults, with all their followers, he replied. Far more than you would think lies stuffed into these vaults. Like lies with like in every heresy, and the monuments are fired, some more, some less, to each depravity its own degree. He turned then, and I followed through that night, between the wall and the torments, bearing right.
All right. Did you want to do? Did you want to read David's poem?
Oh, yeah, I can. I have to go grab it. Hang on.
No problem. While she's grabbing David's poem, Ted, I can see. What are your initial thoughts?
Oh man, I love this canto. Yeah, the whole interaction with the Furies and Medusa and Virgil. I mean, Dante even points out, right, like, look, pay attention to the allegory here. That's like a really rich spot. So that's something I want to pick up when.
I was hoping you could shed some light on it for me, because there's a lot of characters there that
I think the allegory works on a few levels, but we can let's go with the poem first, and then we'll talk about the allegory.
Okay, this is called Medusa, Inferno, Canto 9. My sins will make a statue of me yet, as I tremble waiting for the wrath of love. Encircling serpents gather and beget in me division from the truth above, entombed in fire, divorced from what is real. I turn away from all that I should love. Only the will of God calls me to heal, but I must turn my sight from sin and listen to the voices that only wish me well. Further I must go from the stars that glisten.
All right, Ted, you had thoughts about about what Dante's saying about his allegory. What were you going to say?
So So I think it's a pretty key piece to understanding the entire Inferno, and it actually has a lot to do with the angel coming down as well, because the question is essentially how does a wise and righteous soul approach the horrible things of this world, right? And because there's this sort of progression of like, if you look at the Furies long enough, they'll come and bring their queen. They're the handmaids of woe, and what she does is she turns you into stone. And I wish I could remember when he was saying this, but it's actually Richard Roloff that just made this super clear. He was saying that his friends, in his group of friends, if someone's just like totally getting into that doomer mindset and like talking about all the terrible things going on, say in the church or in the world, they'll be like, stop looking at Medusa. Like that's their yank you back from the edge phrase. And I think that's such a great, that's exactly it. It's not, we have this notion, I think he's getting at this notion that we have that, well, it's what C.S. Lewis says in that, in the Screwtape Letters, right? Where he's like, Screwtape is telling the tempter of the man, make sure that when he sees horrible things like a man's brains plastered against a wall after a bombing run, that's reality. But when he sees like children playing in a field or a cute puppy or something, that's just sentimentality. And so that mindset that when you look, we have this tendency to look at horrible things, they draw us in. It's the same thing as the Palantir, right? That you see this with both Denethor and Saruman. You can look anywhere. Where do you end up looking? At the Tower of Barad-dûr every time, unless you're Aragorn. And so it's not neutral, which brings us all the way to like Pajot and Peterson. Like it's not neutral where you give your attention. And there are certain things, if you look at them, they will turn you to stone. And so then Virgil, as the best of human wisdom and poetry, says, look, don't even look at them. I'm going to cover your eyes. Wisdom tells you that you are not yet strong enough to be able to deal with those things. So that's sort of the start. And then I want to let you guys respond to that before I say anything else.
Right. Yeah, I think the line about allegory certainly refers to that, but I think he's also like, it also, I think, also must also refer to the comedy as a whole, and not just to that portion. So he's kind of like, so yes, he's talking. Yeah, so he's telling you the whole thing is an allegory, and he's definitely letting you know that that portion is an allegory for sure. So I think I think it's true at both those levels. Here's where this is the thing I want to talk about. So I think that's like the idea of Medusa representing like the places that we should not look, like the places where we should not direct our attention. That is great, but sometimes Medusa comes to us unbidden, right? And I'm talking, and to me that seems a good way of understanding the way trauma affects people, and trauma really can turn people to stone. And so, what advice do we want to do when the Medusa comes not because you've misdirected your attention, but comes unbidden?
Yeah.
Well,
I've got a couple things that go, Sherry. Yeah.
Here's what I'm thinking. Like, this is called heretics, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know how much of this is poetry from hell. Yeah. I'm not sure how much of this is about trauma. I'm thinking about idolatry here. Mm-hmm. And so what brought that to mind is the whole portion of like the allegory, right? Medusa turning people into stone brought Psalm 115 to my mind, and I'll just read it. Their idols are silver and gold, made by the hands of men. They have mouths but cannot speak. They have eyes but cannot see. They have ears but cannot hear. They have noses but cannot smell. They have hands but cannot feel. They have feet but cannot walk. They cannot even clear their throats. Those who make them, this is the most important part, those who make them become like them. Mm-hmm. Right? And so I've always had this image of people being turned into stone by idolatry.
Yes, but
Yes.
but here's the thing though, is that not everyone. The fact that you have a idolatrous notion of God is not something that is always entirely a result of your willful action. People
No.
for example,
Well, then we could ask, how much free will do we actually have?
people often get what I would consider an idolatrous notion of God from their allegedly Christian upbringing.
Yeah.
That leads them to worship an image of God that doesn't look anything like God.
But I want to say something. I heard this phrase from someone who I really admire. And he said, blaming is for cowards. Okay? And I'm just like, I had to think about that. Blaming is something that cowards do. And I thought, you know what, there's just, I circled around it and I looked for ways out of it and I just couldn't find any. I think it's true. Not that there isn't a place to assign blame, right? Like you can often assign blame and it's not cowardly to do so. But if that's the place that you operate from, right? And I know this because I did it for many years. I blamed like my Christian upbringing, some of the trauma that I experienced as a child. I blamed that and I used it as an excuse to do the things that I thought I deserved, and I had to come to a point where I had to stop. And when I did that, when I realized, okay, I got to stop blaming somebody else for my life, it took courage. Those two things came together, right? It took courage to lay that aside and actually take my responsibility for my own actions and my life.
Yeah. So I actually think there's a way to kind of pull all of this stuff together, which is what I think this particular canto is about. And that has to do with the notion of the connection between the good and being, right? That those are the same. And so what happens when you move away from God is that you have less being, right? You exist less as you move away from God. And so we've got two parallel images. One is the sort of movement out of agency and being turned into stone, right? So that's one path, right? Is that you're less and less until you're not anything anymore, right? Then the opposite, the other image we have is that of the angel, who has so much existence that even hell isn't hell to him, right? He's like a little annoyed at the stink, right? But he's unaffected by the afflictions and the suffering of hell. The doors open before him because there's no real resistance. And I think that's what this is pointing us to. There's two directions. If you move away from God, you move away from being, and your own being, your own agency will be diminished. And I think because the transition point of the city of Dis, and I hadn't seen this until we were going through this together. Previously, all these sins are about misusing goods that everyone agrees on, right? Everything above this has all been misdirected good, right? Love, physical bodies, money, wrath, which is a good, which can be a good. I mean, we talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
Food. But the moment when you go from that to heresy conceived of as to view the world wrongly in the most core thing, right? Now we're not talking about, well, I didn't understand how I was supposed to use food. Now it's, I am not loyal to God as he is. And it's that's the sort of like, now we're really headed away to somewhere bad. And so I see that as that sort of, it's the diminishing of a person's being through sin, which seems to me to be like the entire, and then you get this like increasing, everything just gets duller and more repetitious, and even the heretics, they're all stuffed in there together, right? Like with like, there's this idea of, I'm exhibiting my individuality by holding these positions that no one else does. And then you're just stuffed in the container of heresy and hell. So, yeah, it's that movement from being out of being that I see as being really key here.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I want to talk about the heretics bit because I don't from the text like Chardy has a note here that I just don't necessarily see from the text, so I don't know where he's getting this. But he says in his introduction, like right before Sherry started reading, this torment of the heretics of every cult. By heretic, Dante means specifically those who did violence to God by denying immortality. Since they taught that the soul dies with the body, so their punishment is an eternal grave in the fiery morgue of God's wrath.
There's all sorts of heresy that's not about denying the eternity of the soul.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm wondering like why he has that note, because it seems like he's talking about all heresy.
That seems like a
as far as I
stretch.
can tell, straightforward. Yeah, it does to me too. Okay, so everyone agrees that that's a stretch. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I don't see that.
I don't
think
I don't see any warrant from the text to draw that conclusion.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Well, I like the idea that Ted, of the distance between you and God, turning you to stone, essentially, right?
Yeah,
and like if you keep in mind that sin is missing the mark, right? Like it's an actual misperception of what is real and what is true and what is good and what is beautiful. Then you're going to go, really, off the path direction, right? Farther away from the source, let's say, of all those things. And according to Psalm 115, that is going to turn you into stone. Where
Can I ask a question? I think it's interesting to me, like why is this in the circle of the heretics? That like why is that where this happens? Like is there any link in Dante's allegory? Is there any link here between heresy and this idea of, I mean, clearly I think the Medusa has to do with directing attention in a place that turns you to stone.
Go.
Right? Like directing your gaze where it shouldn't go. Is that so? I think maybe that's also, isn't that also kind of what heresy does?
Yeah, it okay, so maybe I'm working through this.
Sure.
Me too. I'm thinking.
It really does seem like a major transition, because up until this point, there's been a sort of like thinking about the church as a family. And I know you love this, Nate, right? And part of the reason I think Dante is really pulling on that, because Medusa is described as the Queen of Woe? Is it something like that? There's the handmaidens of the Queen of Woe. And, the first thing, the Queen of Woe, I'm like, okay, there's the Queen of Heaven, who's sent Dante on this journey through St. Lucy, through Beatrice, right? And here we have this is the infernal, right? We had the handmaidens of the Queen of Heaven, these saints that have come down to, who are acting to try to save Dante. And then you have the opposite, you have the handmaidens of the Queen of Hell. And so I think we're really supposed to see this parallel there. And these sins previously they're the sins of people who are operating within the family of the church and failing to do so appropriately, right? Mm-hmm. You can try to be a Christian and then just be like, I don't know, I'm just given over to food or to lust or to any of these things. But when you break with the church, which is what heresy is, when you're asserting yourself, you're not merely saying, I can't control my appetites. You're saying, I know better than the church does. There's some fundamental shift there in the way that you relate to reality. I don't know if I feel like I got us halfway there. I don't know.
Okay, so yeah, this is what I was wondering. Like, so heresy, how much agency does a heretic have? That's the question I'm asking myself. I think that's kind of what you were hinting at, Nate, with the trauma, right?
Well, I wasn't thinking. Well, I was thinking like, no, not really, because
No?
like the heretic, I think the heretic is like, well, I mean, we can get into like how much agency we have in our own thoughts. That's. But generally, I think like we have some agency in them. I would say this: it's yeah, it's tough. It's like, yeah,
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what I want to say there.
Let me just throw something out there. We're dealing with this strange paradox, which I was trying to get at with being, right? Which is that when you move closer to God, you're not annihilated, you're actually realized. When you move away from God, there's annihilation. I think in the same sense, there's this, with heresy, there's a notion of asserting your independence and your agency, right? Oh, like I'm a free thinker, right? Think about like being a free thinker. You know, I'm not constrained by the doctrine of the church. I believe what I want to. And Dante is saying, do we believe him? You got to make that decision. But if you do that, it actually doesn't make you more of a person, more of an intellect, more of an agent. It actually reduces you to nothingness. But not because, well, and I was thinking about this the other day when I was doing tree work. You know, tree work is very consequentialist in the sense that like trees do what they want to. They don't care what you think, right? And I was thinking about that and thinking about God instructing us in what is right and wrong. And it's like, we tend to look at that and think, well, why is God making these rules? It's like, no, he's telling us what will destroy us. Because if goodness and being are the same, then to walk out of goodness is to be destroyed. And so when God gives us these things and says, you need to believe these, you need to fill your intellect with these things, you need to act in these ways, he's telling us how to not be destroyed, right? How to not be diminished. Yeah. And I don't know. I think that's kind of the weird thing.
I see Father Eric in here. I'm gonna drop a link in case he wants to get in here while we're talking.
This would be
invite the priest
a perfect place to have a,
because he's making some very particular distinctions about material and formal heresy. Mm-hmm. And I think this is actually a distinction I was trying to make myself recently in the argument I was having with Pajot when, you know, he called Catholics heretics, and I'm like, by what authority? and kind of got in.
So okay, so shoot, I had a question. Here. How much of a heretic is Dante? Like, how much heresy is in this poem? Because I think that I'm talking about perceived heresy. I'm not talking about actual heresy. Because I think that if he takes some really, you know, poetic license, right? And
all right, here we have a priest here to sort us out now.
Perfect. Thank you. And so I'm just wondering, like, is he pointing at something that he thinks is heretical? Like, because he says, where is that? When he talks about the veiledness of this allegory, men of sound intellect and probity weigh with good understanding what lies hidden behind the veil. Okay, so he's got something tucked away back there.
Right. Yeah, so that's like, there's a way in which in order to do theology well, you have to risk heresy. Like, if you can't do theology well without, because then you're not it's a really interesting, and it's like, and the other thing is like, well, you don't want to commit heresy, but you also don't want to say things that you think are untrue, right? So it's like you have to be obedient to the spirit of truth.
Yeah, you have to set your ego aside. Actually, I think that's kind of the, no.
This is such a funny discussion that I get into with some people in my life who aren't Catholic, and because in my understanding, submitting to the doctrines of the church that have been passed down is to set my ego aside. Like, that is to seek to not be a heretic is absolutely following the spirit of truth. But these other people, they're like, oh, but you're submitting to the things of man. And I'm like, but I'm a man too. And so if I were to step outside of that, like, how's that any less like of a man for me to be like, I came to these ideas by myself? There doesn't seem to be any, like,
a man. It's not a man though, Ted. It's collective wisdom over thousands of years.
Well, let's not.
I guess that's.
I get all of that.
That's kind of redundant, but yeah, Father Eric, what are you thinking about? I want to hear from you.
I just wanted to make sure that we were clear on the distinction between material and formal heresy because I brought that up.
Yeah.
It's very easy to fall into material heresy. You're just incorrect about something, you misunderstand it, and it's not a problem. Where you get into trouble, and I'm obviously speaking from a Catholic point of view, is when you really start resisting kind of the established authority of the church. Somebody's pointed out and saying, you're on the other side of the line here, and not only that, but you're also trying to lead others astray on this.
Yeah.
And that's where you'll actually get a rebuke because nobody can actually censure you for what's going on between your ears.
Right.
You never, speak it out loud there. And so, we don't go around trying to make sure that everybody's got a perfectly crisp and clear understanding of the communication of idioms between the, two natures of Christ and in the one person, because most people don't need that. And if they get a little confused about it, it's not going to hurt them all that much. But if they go around, saying this or that's a big problem, yeah. So anyway, that's what I've got.
He does mention cult followers, right? Like, so these people here in this part of the poem obviously have taken others with them, which is what you're talking about there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also this. One last little thing. There's this understanding that faith isn't something that you generate inside yourself, but it's ultimately from the influence of the Holy Spirit. He's the one who gives you the ability to assent to divinely revealed truth supernaturally. And so if you're resisting that, then you're always resisting God.
Okay.
Well, that's so interesting, Father, because this is the first time where Dante and Virgil have needed direct heavenly intervention to pass through, right? It's been enough for Virgil to lead him through wrath and lust, right? Because we've basically been going through the virtues of the golden mean with Aristotle, right? It's like, you've got these two excesses on either side, and natural prudence will teach you how to, not be greedy, how to not be gluttonous, how to not be lustful. But then we run up against this issue of faith, and it's like Virgil can't get him through that. We need something else. We need direct help from God, from the throne of God, right? It says the angels from the throne of God, and that's the difference between the cardinal virtues. The cardinal virtues have been leading us thus far, and that's been fine. But now we're in the realm where we need the theological virtues, which are infused. Those are things that are given to us, not simply cultivated.
Okay, so what do you both think, Father Eric and Ted? What do you both think of the fact that this is Virgil? Like, he's not a Catholic.
Who's been leading them thus far?
Yeah. And no, not just the fact that he's leading him, but he's actually aware of what heresy is.
Yeah, well, he's now in a position where the veil has been lifted, and according to the standards of the time, with one very, very odd exception that we'll get to in the Paradiso, Virgil wouldn't have made it, but since he was virtuous, he got to go to the least unpleasant part of hell, limbo, right on the rim there. And I think that's a way of giving credit to what the human goodness that God has created. It's like, there's still good in the world. It's fallen. It's not going to be complete. It can't reach to a perfection, but it can get you somewhere. And also seeing that, sort of the wisdom of pagan antiquity had something to offer to the church, so that St. Augustine would say, well, yeah, of course we read the pagan philosophers, because the Hebrews plundered the Egyptians on their way out, and so we're plundering the Greeks.
I love that.
Origen actually said that. Actually, that's
and Augustine got it from Origen.
I think
they both said it.
I mean,
okay.
if he didn't get it from Origen, he just, it's obvious. But yeah, so then Virgil is before the establishment of the church, right? So okay.
Yeah. So I see very much the same relationship between St. Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle. I think that's, I mean, that's what I'm seeing in the poem here with this angelic intervention at this particular stage. St. Thomas Aquinas doesn't look at Aristotle and say, idiot, like what's his name in The Princess Bride? Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, idiot. It's like, that's not what he does. He takes Aristotle as a starting point and goes a really long way with him, and as a basis for a lot of the way that he thinks about virtues and all these things. And I think, let's say, Dante is trying to do the same thing with the greatest pagan poet, Virgil, and then trying to translate that into the context of the Christian revelation, right? If you think of Aristotle and then St. Thomas Aquinas with philosophy, I think Dante himself conceives of what he's doing as Virgil to Dante, this transposition of the best of the pagans into, the revelation of the triune God and the incarnation. I don't think he sees any conflict there in being given guidance through even heresy by one of the wisest men of old. Like Father was saying, there's this notion of, well, God's reality is real and we've always been living in it. And so now that Christ has come and we have the full revelation, we shouldn't expect that everything should be thrown out. I mean, the world is real, and those men and women were looking at real things and thinking real things about real things. And they were, God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust, and the sun to shine on the righteous and the wicked alike. Let's look at Virgil. He's going to help us out here. He was a wise man.
What do you think Dante's hiding behind the veil of this strange allegory? Because all the things that we just mentioned are to me, they're pretty obvious, right? But what is it that Dante's hiding? Like he's giving us a challenge in this when he says men of sound intellect and probity. He's appealing to the ego there.
Well,
way with good understanding what lies hidden behind the veil of my strange allegory.
Sherry, I'd also point out that I think he's making a direct reference to the inscription in hell, or I don't know if it's the inscription or not, but where he describes hell as a place where men have lost the good of the intellect. So the citizens of hell are those who have lost the good of the intellect. Dante is saying, for those of you who are not yet here, who have a chance of having a redeemed intellect, pay attention to what's going on. I don't know. I mean, you have to ask the question. I think I would just say I tend to fall on the side more of Dante saying, remember that we're reading this, on Augustine's 4 levels, St. Augustine's 4 levels of interpretation. Don't just think, oh, he's meeting Medusa. Realize that Medusa is about, well, the stuff that we've said about right. As you move away from God, your being and your agency and your intellect are all reduced until you might as well say you're turned into stone. And likewise with those who worship idols, they become like them. So I
one of the things I don't know what to make of it. One of the things that's interesting in terms of the image in that portion is that Virgil tells him to close his eyes, but then he also puts his hands over his eyes.
He puts his hands over Dante's hands over his eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like triple security.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So why that? Why that?
Because the danger, I think the danger of opening your eyes out of curiosity is so great. Why? And Virgil already knows what's going to happen if that happens. And Dante is not your average hell crosser. He's alive. Right. Yeah. And so, this guy, he's on a mission. He's on a journey that needs to be completed. And there's an urgency to getting him through these places without any harm being done. I think that's what I perceive.
I've got a lot of things, but I want Father Eric to answer that question if he wants to.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I kind of think of Dr. Peterson's interpretation of the Medusa there as the two things that make men, freeze in fear, and that's snakes and women. Is there something there to that where I can't actually make a connection with that, so we'll just leave.
That's fantastic.
That's actually great.
I'm not afraid of either. So
I never heard Peterson talk about that. That's great.
That does not resonate with me at all.
You don't remember being a
I
middle
have no
schooler
fear
then,
of
Nate?
snakes or of ladies.
You don't remember being a middle schooler then?
Well,
the
yeah,
snakes
that's
you can
true.
learn how to handle.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Well, it's actually really amazing when you think about how often you see snakes, like women turning into snakes in literature. I mean, you've got that in, especially with the Inklings, you know, the silver chair, right? The witch turning into the serpent. And then if you've read The Place of the Lion by Charles Williams, you have another woman turning into a snake.
The Lamia from The Lamb
Lamia,
Lays Down on Broadway by Genesis.
Oh, I thought you were just talking about the lamia as a mythological creature.
Well, yeah.
That's
You mean the band? You mean the band Genesis?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I've got that on vinyl over here.
Look, women and snakes both hit your brainstem. I don't know how else to say it, but like they both hit your brainstem really hard. They like bypass a lot of things. Your response to them does not tend to reside up in your prefrontal cortex. Your response to women and to snakes is way back down here. And, you know, I actually think about, well, actually, okay, so going back to this, the image of covering your eyes, right? That makes me think of they call it the Ulysses Pact, right? When Odysseus is going by the sirens and he, oh my goodness. when Odysseus is going by the sirens, right? It's like, what do? Do you wait until you hear the sirens before you figure out what you're going to do about them? No, you lash yourself to the mast and stuff wax in your men's ears. You have to do it before you start, before they come at you, because it will just bypass everything you think you should be doing. Does Medusa ever show up? Dante wasn't looking. You know, Dante wasn't looking. He never sees if Medusa shows up or not. She might have, but he doesn't know. And it's like, it's not for him to know. You know, can I jump ahead just a little bit in the comedy, because I think there's something that would probably resonate with. Okay. So there's this one little point way, way, way down in hell where these sinners start fighting with each other. And Dante just, like, they're all like sick. They're just afflicted with sickness, like dropsy and leprosy and all this stuff. And they're like punching each other. And it's this really like grotesque buffoonery. And Dante is just like drinking it up. And Virgil gets so mad at him. He gets so mad at him for sitting, which is weird when you think about that part in the Circle of the Wrathful, where Virgil praises him for like being glad that the soul is being punished. But I think what you need to see in that Circle of Hell, and we'll get there when we get there, is not that Dante is agreeing with the punishment, but that he's delighting in it, and he is fascinated. And that's the word right there that I think is so key, is that he's fascinated by it. And you tell me what the difference is between Dante being damned to hell and Dante endlessly watching the sinners in the bottom circle of hell.
Yeah, well, that is kind of what
him.
hell is, right? Like just being fixed.
Just being fixed. And so there's that notion of fascination there, I think is so key. And that's what Virgil's trying to save him from. And the problem with fascination is that like once you get into it, it's really someone else has to yank you out of there. Someone's got to grab you and pull you away from that thing.
Yeah, which is what Medusa is really like. It's that.
Can we draw a contrast between fascination and wonder? What
makes them different? But
what
different.
Can we point at what makes them what distinguishes between fascination and wonder? Because I think that kind of like fascination that you're talking about, it's easy to see the dark side of that, but wonder generally is only generally has a positive resonance. So why is that?
Yeah,
it
seems
can,
like it's
but
properly...
there's a really great scene in.
Father Eric was going to say something, Sherry.
Okay. It's all about proper integration. So, you know, the same wonder that led Thomas Aquinas to integrate Aristotle into Christianity in a, I think, most excellent way, might have led Sigurd de Brabant to sacrifice Christian doctrine in favor of his Averroistic interpretation of Aristotle. And it was like, that was the same kind of impulse, the same kind of, you know, we'll say, trying to get to the bottom of things that led them into different directions. And it's whether or not you're willing to submit it to Christ or not. Because I don't know if you guys know anything about Sigurd de Brabant, but he was picking up this idea from Averroes that all men shared basically the same active intellect, like in the heavens somehow, and which would mean that we all are basically have the same soul, which means that all humanity is one in a way that would ultimately erase distinction. And maybe you like that idea, but it definitely ain't Christian. So
no, I don't like that idea.
I'll say there's one more part later on that will, at the beginning of the Purgatorio, that will have a ton of resonance with this, and I think will help us like really kind of work, Nate, into what you're talking about, this notion of wonder versus fascination. But one of them, I think you can like, this isn't an ontological description of it. It's more of a phenomenological description. Wonder opens you up, and fascination narrows you. I really think.
I think that's wonder, right. Yes. Yeah. That's it. Because, fascination actually, it leads to obsession, right? Yeah. And to a reciprocal narrowing, and wonder opens you up. That is precisely the right distinction. Yeah. I think that's
and you can be fascinated with good things. This is one of the weird things. This is one of the things that Dante will bring up. Like, we're in hell. It's all nasty now, so it's like the fascination's just like a good like well-trained appetites would lead you to not be fascinated by most of the stuff in hell. But there's this weird distinction later on of how do you not be fascinated by inappropriate. I'm using fascinated here just in the negative sense. I'm not saying like that's an etymologically appropriate thing to do, but right now you can be fascinated by good things, and that's sort of basically what we've been talking about. The circle, like Francesca and Paola, right? So what do you do with the glory of romantic love, right? There's something really wild that happens there, and like, is it going to inspire wonder in you, or is it going to inspire fascination in you? And Charles Williams, in the figure of Beatrice's argument, is essentially that if it's fascination, then you're damned, and if it's wonder, then you're saved. And Dante's whole journey towards Beatrice is, when it's appropriate, is one of wonder. So yeah, I think there's a lot there. To bewitch, enchant, fascinate.
Yeah, I think we can go ahead and just use that 100% with the negative valence.
Yeah,
we'll be just fine.
Yeah, I think it pretty much. Yeah, it does. Fascination definitely does seem to have a negative. And that's why I said, and wonder seems to have just an absolutely positive valence at the same time. So I think it's interesting because they seem so close, right? They seem so close, and yet there's this world of difference between them. And that thing that you pointed out, Ted, that the one causes you to narrow and the other opens you up, that's precisely where the difference lies. That's good.
Well, so you in this canto, he says that heaven which encircles everything, right? We've got this, like, he's just really drilling in on this valence of, as you go down into sin, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and as you move up towards God, everything opens out. Sorry, Father, I cut you there.
Yeah, and bringing it back to heresy, something that I heard when I was in seminary, and it seems true to me, is that more heresy comes from imbalance than it does just from being straight up wrong, right? So that heresy tends to be an overemphasis on this, that, or the other thing, and to the point where you're not giving the due credit and perhaps even denying another true thing. And so if we use this model, it's like, we'll take Arius. Arius was so
fascinated by?
Yeah, fascinated by the but what was it exactly? It would be the aseity of the Father and the transcendence of the Father, that he actually denied the proper divinity of the Son somehow. That might not be quite right. And so it was just taking of this one idea and holding on to it and elevating it to the point where he was throwing out something else that was good. That's where you get into trouble.
Yeah, and what comes to my mind in those things, like when people overemphasize a certain thing, and I find people do this even outside of the church, right? Like they just find the one thing. They can't hold the tension between things, right? Like, for example, the two natures of Christ. And so in order to relieve the tension, they find the one thing that, it's the one ring to rule them all, right? It's the one thing that matters.
Well, and you can see
right?
how there's a straight line. There's a straight line from that impulse to idolatry, because that's precisely the same instinct. It's like,
and then as the psalm says, you become the thing, right? You become the idol. You have eyes, but you can't see. You have ears, but you can't hear. You turn to stone, and that's why that when they mention Medusa turning to stone, immediately Psalm 115 came to my mind, because I thought, this is actually what idolatry is. It's finding that one thing, right, that's going to relieve the tension that you can't hold, instead of holding the tension.
Right. I mean, this is the whole, like, the two central Christian mysteries of the Trinity and the Incarnation. Like, if you can, like, that is all about holding the tension. Like, it's all about holding the tension and not resolving it into, it's not 1/3, it's not 3/1. Yeah. It's not God over man, it's not man over God. It's like, and that is like, that's it. Like, I mean, you like even in the sign of the cross, like the sign of the cross is those two mysteries together, right? Because like when you're doing it, it's like the Trinity and the Incarnation right there, as you're making the sign of the cross. And this is Pajot's whole point that is really, really valuable, about that there's not a way to resolve the issue of multiplicity and unity except in the Trinity. Like, you're just going to fall down on one side or the other. You're going to fall down on all is one, or everything's disconnected. And if you want a life where things fit together but don't dissolve, like the Trinity is it. Holding tension seems to be close like stone.
I just want to address this, because that's not what I'm saying. This is not what I'm saying. So McGilchrist makes a really great example. I mentioned this yesterday, actually, in our conversation with Rafe, that you stretch the strings.
Which hasn't been posted yet. It's coming.
You stretch the strings on a violin, right? You put them under tension so that you can play music on those strings, right?
Yeah.
And music is complex. The complexity happens on the tension of the strings. So anyway, I just want to, it's not.
So can I read one of my favorite lines from the four quartets that this is in Little Gidding. It's almost at the very end of the poem. It's in part 3, the beginning of part 3 in Little Gidding, which is the last of the four quartets. He says, there are 3 conditions which often look alike, yet differ completely, flourish in the same hedgerow: attachment to self and to things and to persons, detachment from self and from things and from persons, and growing between them, indifference, which resembles the others as death resembles life. And I think about, that question there about holding tension sounds like being a stone. It's like, yeah, it resembles them somewhat, but that doesn't mean that it's the same thing. And that notion that Eliot's describing there of, there are these things that on the outside look like wonder and fascination, right?
Right.
Or being, and so there is this weird sense, right, in which the souls who are circling endlessly down towards the very pit of hell are like the dimmest echo of the souls spinning endlessly in joy around the throne of God. But it resembles one light as the other, like death does life.
Well, I want to read a quote from George MacDonald here. He says, and this has to do with the two sides, right? The life and the death, and what things look like. He says, yet all the time I seem to have a kind of double consciousness, and the story a double meaning. Sometimes it seemed only to represent a simple story of an ordinary life, perhaps almost of universal life, wherein two souls loving each other and longing to come nearer do, after all, but behold each other as in a glass darkly. So he gives credence to the fact that, and I say it like this: there's two sides to every coin, right? Where there's dark, there's good and evil. and so depending on your perspective, and this is where I think meaning is very subjective, because it depends on where you're coming from, right? That's why George MacDonald can say, when someone asks him, well, what if I don't get the meaning from your story that you're intending? And he says, maybe your meaning is better than mine. So
I'll be really interested, Sherry, to hear what you think about my talk on Inscapes whenever we get from the poetry event, whenever I get that up.
cool.
You talk on what?
Father Jarmely Hopkins' idea of the Inscape.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that might do some things for you. But what MacDonald is saying there, right? Almost two stories. One, there's a sort of particularity and this universality at the same time. And I would say, like, again, we have this tendency to be like Averroes. It's like, oh, well, there's this it's all one, right? Or no, there's no connection.
Yeah.
This is my story, and it's like, no, actually, the only way to be alive is to hold on to both at the same time. Both, like, this is me and my beloved and our story, and it's also participation in this universal pattern. At the same time, definitely both. If it's not both, you're in big trouble, basically. I don't know what else to say. It's like, and that's how the multiplicity and unity work out together in one particular case. It's like, I'm me and I'm also a father, right? In that sense, I participate in fatherhood in an actual, real sense. And yet I'm not the father. I'm totally not the father, but I absolutely participate in fatherhood. Yeah. Suspension bridges work on constant tension.
Yeah,
So do trees, which are alive.
All meaning is personal. That's what subjective is. It's personal to me. That's what I'm getting at. It's about where you're standing and how you're receiving the thing.
So I'm thinking about a particular relationship that I have where we live in a tension with something. So I am a Latin Mass enjoyer. I like celebrating it. I like
I'm
seeing
sorry,
it.
Father.
Yeah, I like seeing it expand. I have a friend who's about my age, also a priest. He's a bit more of a Latin Mass skeptic, and I will compliment him on his integrity and his honesty in these things. And we have this constant back and forth. It's not constant. It just comes a regular back and forth where we are engaging with each other. Now, 100%, I believe that we're on the same team. We're both Catholic priests. We both want to glorify God in the church, and we both want to figure out the best way of doing that. And it's really good that we're able to have this tension underneath this friendship towards the highest good. That prevents me from turning the Latin Mass into an idol.
Right,
Yep.
right.
Yeah.
Because I'm getting pulled. I'm like, well, like, you trust Father Riley. Like, don't get too crazy about this,
Yeah.
And it's when we're actually, and that's why I say that this tension is actually a function of living beings, right? Because it takes time, energy, and attention towards these relationships in order to actually maintain that tension. The heretic takes his one idea, doesn't let anybody criticize it at all, can't live with other people's ideas inside the same church,
and drags others with him.
Father Eric, have you read Catherine Pickstock's After Writing? I recommend it to you. It's actually the best philosophical defense of the importance of the traditional Latin Mass, and it's written by an Anglican theologian.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Nate, that's the one that you read.
Don't give him any argument.
Nate, when we were having a meal in Chino, and you read a passage about the connection between the words of consecration and meaning.
That's from After Writing. That's from Catherine Pickstock's After Writing. Yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah.
I missed that.
Well, she says that, essentially, she says that the words of consecration are actually this in the traditional Latin Mass are actually the source of the meaning of all words. It's a very interesting passage. It's like she says, not only are they not of ambiguous meaning, they are a source of the meaning of all other words.
Of all other words. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Y'all keep going. I've got to bow out, but this has been delightful. So keep it up.
Ted.
Bye, Ted.
Father Eric, you ready? You want to keep going, or should we call it a wrap?
You normally go about an hour for a canto seems
Yeah,
good to me.
usually we usually do about an hour to an hour and a half, depending. Looks like I think we.
I have one question before you guys leave.
Absolutely.
What's with the angel? What's with the angel, Nate and Father Eric? Who's this angel? What's he doing?
They don't tell us. It
doesn't matter.
Angel.
It doesn't matter
which angel. Okay. It could be the lowest angel in the heavenly courts. Yeah. Nothing in hell can touch him.
Right.
And he's kind of bored, right? Bored with the whole proceeding.
Yeah, he is.
Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I got to come out all the way into the realm of the damned for this hoser Dante.
Yeah.
Well, he doesn't even notice. He doesn't even notice him.
Yeah.
Really?
Actually the hilarious part is like you guys are still optimists. Basically, it's like aren't you ready to give up yet? So yeah.
Yeah, funny. and then another thing that stood out to me was the people were in trunks. Like they were in an enclosed small space, right? Like, isn't that how he describes it?
Yeah, they're in tombs, spires.
Tombs, yeah. But no, there was
and they're actually like red hot.
Yeah, but there was let me see here if I can find it. Buried in these chests. Master, what shades are these who lie buried in these chests and fill the air with such painful and unending cry? And these are the arch heretics of all cults. See, he says, in a ring around each tomb, great fires raised every wall to a red heat. No smith works hotter iron in his forge. The biers stood with their lids upraised, and from their pits an anguished moaning rose. So do I just have the wrong image in my head?
Hold on a second. Let me.
It's line 115 to 125.
I'm trying to find an image of the. Here we go. Here's an image. I'll share my screen so you can get an idea of what the kind of thing he's talking about. Oh.
I need images.
Yes, no problem. Oh, weird. I click on the link and it doesn't actually go to the... I had a perfect image and then it doesn't actually...
Yeah.
But it's like a... Oh, here we go. Yeah, Napoleon's... Have you ever seen an image of Napoleon's tomb?
No.
That's a... Okay, let me show you then. Let's see. Go to StreamYard. Share my screen.
He says, these are the arch heretics of all cults, with all their followers. Far more than you would think lies stuffed into these vaults.
Yeah, so in the next canto, it explicitly says graves on line 7.
Yeah, okay. So do you see this, Sherry? See how it like kind of looks like a chest and it's got a lid?
I see.
But it's a tomb?
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing he's talking about. That's actually Napoleon's.
And a heretical sect is like a... they talk about the Noah's Ark passing over the floods towards safety. They're a parody of that, but it's actually a tomb for a watery or fiery grave.
Right. Okay, got it. Now I get it. Just needed a picture in my head. But they are then enclosed, right?
No, that says the lids are open.
I know.
That's why he's able to hear the
potential for to being stuffed. Like I just get this claustrophobic feeling when I read the poem, right?
Gotcha.
Stuffed and pushed and lids and chests.
The lids will probably be closed at some point.
Yeah.
When their full number is completed.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. That's an interesting way to deal with a heretic, is stuff them in a chest.
Well, it's funny because you're always going to claim that you should be free to do this. But if you follow your own freedom without reference to the highest, to the Almighty, then your own freedom will always lead to being cramped because you're
Yeah.
not living in the world. You're creating your own world.
Yeah, that's right.
Yourself in rather than opening yourself out into your Father's kingdom.
Father Eric, there's no true freedom.
We used McDonald's Unspoken Servant and Child in the Midst as a kind of a springboard for the conversation we just recorded with Rafe Kelly. And there's a line in there where McDonald says is that under the umbrella of love, like will and obedience are one. That they're not that they are, that they coincide.
Yeah, and in another sermon, MacDonald actually says no one can say that they truly love God if they don't obey him. And I think that's true in all cases. Like even, like if
he got that straight from our Lord Jesus.
Yeah, of course.
If you love me, keep my commandments.
Yeah.
So good for McDonald,
Yeah. No, he's got a few things right, actually, Father Eric. But I think that applies even in relationships with other people, right? Like if you love somebody, then you're going to obey them in the sense that you're going to serve them, right? That like you're not going to do their every, beck and call. But you know what I'm saying?
You're obeying the goodness that draws you together.
There you go. Thank you.
Right. So like for a married couple, you'd be keeping the wedding vows that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
To have and to hold from this day forward, from good times and bad, and riches reward, sickness.
Not only that, but sometimes you want something and the partner says no, and you have to say okay, even though you don't want to,
for the sake of the relationship.
Yeah,
and the good that the relationship affords.
And just the love is an expression of your faith and trust in that person too, right? Like the obedience, the love and the obedience in that sense.
Well, that's why I think there's we talked earlier about the distinction between wonder and fascination. I think there's also a distinction between obedience and submission. And which is why I think that's why I think Islam and being all about submission is deeply wrong, because submission does not seek out to know the will. It doesn't seek out any knowledge of the will that it obeys. It simply sees the will as will and submits to it because of its power. And that is completely different than obedience, because obedience requires that you have knowledge of what you are doing.
It means to listen carefully.
Correct. Yeah. There really aren't the same thing.
Well, it's an engagement of your will, right? To do the thing.
Well, like that's part of that thing that McDonald talks about of where the will and obedience coincide under love to become to be one thing. Mm-hmm. They're doing one action. They point toward the same freedom, true freedom.
I think you're pointing at something, Nate. I'm not quite so ready to throw out the word submission, but I don't know what other word I don't know what other word to put there. So
yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Well, there is that idea that Christ, I think it's David Bentley Hart in his translation uses the word drags all things unto him. You know what I'm talking about there, Nate? I don't remember what verse it is, but I think it's the verse that is normally translated as everything becomes subject to him, and there's a kind of submission there that is holy and good and right, so I don't know. Every knee will bow, every tongue confess, right?
Yeah, and I think submission comes from being sent under somebody's command.
Yeah. Yes.
So you're not immediately. I'm thinking of whatever it was that brought people under the sway of, and here we go, Godwin's Law, of the Nazis in the 1930s. Just kind of the power,
right? Exactly,
that they were.
Right.
I don't have a word for it, so.
Yeah,
maybe
to
maybe
refer
there's
to the
some.
discretion or judgment of another. So it just doesn't. It doesn't, as you can see, like there's no. It's just you don't. It doesn't care about anything about that judgment, right? It's not. It's just like you just. It's blind.
It's blind. Yeah,
Submission
like,
is blind.
well, that kind of submission is blind.
Well, I
But
kind of think of that like you shared that little joke from the Green Prince, where he
mhm,
like that where that he told at the end of that speech, where he was
mhm.
talking about like he was making like he was telling a joke about the difference between a Muslim and a Jew, and like that joke kind of points to the difference between that, because there's no
Yeah,
there's no discernment
that's right.
in just pure submission. There's no discernment at all. Like it's just okay. So I think God wants more than that from us. That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, well, the book of Job actually illustrates that quite well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Job's like,
Right.
what is going on?
Yeah, yeah.
But, submission is a word that a lot of women have to deal with, especially Christian women, right? And I know for myself, the first feeling that I got when reminded of my, submission to my husband, was one of like a knot in my stomach, terrified, fear. Like, who is this person? I don't even know what he's going to do with my life. Like, do I just blindly follow this person? And I don't think so. Actually, I think part of the help meet for him is to say, wait a minute, not that. That's not appropriate. You're misbehaving. You can't say those things, kind of thing. And so, but at the same time, I find myself in a position where I'm like, okay, you're right. I will, you know, but it's not blind.
Yeah. Okay. I just don't even want to touch that right now. I don't even want to touch that. I need to think more about what I'm trying to the distinction I'm trying to draw here. But I think there's
Well,
some,
no, I
I
think
think
you're
what
on
I'm pointing out is a real distinction. But
Well, I
I'd
think
want to
blind
spend more time
submission is.
with it.
I think blind submission is what you're talking about, like an actual blind. Just this is
Yeah.
why after the Second World War, I was just following orders doesn't work anymore.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I was just following orders. Yeah.
hmm
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
doesn't cut it anymore. People are like, nope,
Right.
sorry, you should
Yeah.
have
Well, I
used
mean,
your
well, yeah.
moral
I mean, well,
compass.
there you go. It's like, okay, so let's say, like, I actually, okay, let me go there.
Mhm.
Let's look at the early Christian martyrs, right? Who died in obedience, right? And
Mhm.
went to their martyrdom, versus the contemporary martyrs that we have in the Islamic world, who are blowing themselves up. There's that to me, like, there's clearly a difference there.
Yeah, one is a letting go of, and one is a having, because they do it for perks in the Muslim world. Okay, if they do that, they get more than the average person who dies. Right? They're doing it for perks. I'm telling you, bonuses, heavenly bonuses. What is it? 40 virgins and all that stuff. So, yeah, no, it's and it's interesting because it's also a polygamous society. Okay. So you end up with a lot of kind of guys kicking cans around, going, I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
Oh, you could do this,
we have to
and then
save
you
some
could
of this
have
for
all the, you
we
could have
have to
40
save
of
some
them.
of this for part 2 of our conversation of Hezi with Hezi. I think we
Plus, Mohammed shows up later in the comedy. So
Does he? Does
he
he?
does. He
Oh,
does.
interesting.
Well, and the city of Dis that we're in right now, it's like it's the towers have moss. He describes them as a mosque. So
minarets.
What was that?
I think it's minarets.
No, he actually says moss.
Oh, okay.
He actually does say moss. He says the moss. There's a line in Canto 8 about the mosque in the city of Dis. So, yeah. All right, I have to go and get ready to go and visit my mom. So, sure, if you want to keep the stream going.
No, I have to go.
I think I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotta go.
Right.
The animals.
Nice to see you today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
That was great.
Yeah, anytime.
Anytime,
You're
yeah.
always welcome.
Well,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yep. God bless. Take care.
God bless you all.
Bye, guys.
Yep.